There's nothing quite as beautiful as a hand-drawn drawing. However, they have a problem, which is that they are physical objects, and we need to convert them to something electronic so that we can present them and distribute them to our teachers and our clients. And there are a number of different ways to do that, but since we all have super smartphones, we're going to see how to, first of all, get a good quality image using our smartphone, and then we're going to learn how to use Photoshop to manipulate those hand-drawn images to make a nice presentation board. Now, the easiest way for most of you, since I'd say a majority of you have an iPhone, is you can go to the Notes app on your own iPhone. And it's obviously handy for taking notes, but you can also add a photo. And just click on the photo button and tap Scan Document. And you can use this. It's so much better than a regular photo because it will, first of all, try to find the boundary of your drawing. But if it can't, see how it gives these little crop marks? You can modify the crop marks right there live on your phone. Obviously, it's a little small, but you can usually get pretty close. And I would recommend using the edges of your drawing, which you spent a lot of time getting nice and straight using your straight edge. Use the edges of your drawing to try and crop that drawing as tightly as possible. And what it will do is when you choose Keep Scan, it will correct any perspective distortion based on what you chose as your outline. Now, it will continue to scan if you want, and you can have multiple scans at a time. So I'm going to try to scan this perspective drawing. Now, this is a little more tricky because it doesn't have a rectilinear boundary. Again, you're going to have to find something horizontal to use as a reference. I would recommend the horizon line. Yet another good reason to have a nice, sharp horizon line drawn on your perspective drawings. And again, you can adjust those crop regions using your finger to get it just right, and choose Keep Scan. You'll be able to continue scanning, and I would recommend scanning all of your drawings. You can also scan the legend separately. You could scan the titles for your sheet separately. And again, each of those, try your best to crop the drawing. Now, I'm scanning the site plan here, even though it's on a much larger sheet. It's going to make my life a lot easier if I have each of these drawings already kind of separated out. Now, if you don't, it's not a big deal. We can cope. But each of those drawings will come out as a kind of separate image on my computer. Now, to send them to me, you can see here this is a very nice quality, nice and black. It kind of, because it's scanning, it does it in a very it adjusts the black and white quite nicely. Anyway, just press on the document and there is the share button. And on the Notes application, you can share it as a PDF file. Now, I also happen to use Dropbox for my documents, so when I do that, Dropbox will convert all of these scans into photographs and then convert them to a file format, which we can use in Photoshop. The native file format for Apple doesn't work so great. Now, Photoshop is available through our Endicott software website, which has all sorts of other pieces of software available. It's $20 a month, and it is a subscription. And it will just send you to the Adobe website. Again, these links are going to be on Canvas. And the Adobe website, you can sign in here, just buy now. Just be sure to use your Endicott email, and also be sure to use a password that you're going to remember what it is. And also, it would be handy if it wasn't the same password you've used everywhere else. And once you pay up and log in and all that, Adobe will install something called the Creative Cloud Desktop onto your computer. Now, if you have multiple computers, you can log in and out of your Adobe products on each machine. You can also use that same login to use the desktop computers at in our computer labs if you need them. And there are so many different products that come with Adobe's sort of family here. Here are the ones that I happen to have on my computer: Photoshop, Adobe Illustrator, Acrobat DC is super handy because it creates a virtual PDF printer. We're going to be using that a lot. And there are a couple of others. And if you scroll down, there's just so many different Adobe products. So if you're into making movies or other types of things, doing a lot of high quality photography work, you'll probably be getting a few of these other elements. So here's the Photoshop interface, the kind of splash screen, la-di-da-di, and it will have some recent files here. It'll have some video tutorials if you need. I'm just going to click the Create New button here, and it's on the left. And there are a number of different kind of ready-made file formats, including photo formats and things that are optimized for print or illustration or whatnot. Let's go with print. Let's pretend like we're living in a normal world and we can print. And there are obviously some standard sizes, letter, legal, and tabloid are some of them. We're going to come over here on the right side and we can change it to be a horizontal format. And let's pretend like we're going to make a regular sized board, which is typically 36 by 24 inches. And obviously we can't print this time around, but if we were, this is a pretty standard size and it matches the roll size that we keep in our computer printers, our print lab. Now, one thing to consider, Photoshop is not like other types of programs you may have looked at, in that it is totally what's called a raster editing program. It only deals with dots, known as pixels. Okay, so there's a few settings that you can control. We might think, oh, well, 24 by 36, I'm done, right? Well, actually, no, the resolution, which is the number of pixels you squeeze into an inch, is actually the determinant of how well this thing is going to print. You might say, well, I mean, isn't it going to just print the same no matter what? Well, no, because it might think it's 24 by 36, but if you only have, say, 72 pixels, which is what your screen looks like, it's not going to be enough. Now, these are hand-drawn drawings, so a higher resolution is pretty good. But in fact, for most of our computer-aided drawings, the ones we will generate using our software, 200 is fine. Anyway, I'm going to leave it at 300 and click Create. And here we are in Photoshop, and basically it's a blank piece of paper. And Photoshop is so great at being allowing you to put stuff on that sheet of paper, no matter what the source, just so long as it thinks that it's some sort of image file format. So just go to File, Place Embedded, and if you scanned your document as one big file, and this is true, I used my iPhone and I had many pages, it will give you an option to choose which page you want. You can just click on the page you want. Also, by the way, you can change whether or not it crops it. Now, right now, it's cropping it to drawing lines that it can see, but if your lines are a little on the light side, you might want to choose one of these other bounding options, just so that you don't lose any of your lines. And I'm actually going to start with my interior floor plan. So select it and click OK. And when it comes into your document, it should have a blue bounding box. And with any luck, it's fairly square. And you might be wondering, well, wait a sec, why is it not filling up the whole sheet? I'm going to zoom out by holding down Control and tapping the minus key. And here's my whole sheet of paper. And you can see it's actually not super big. And the reason for that is that Photoshop looks at the image size, and that is the image size in pixels. So if my image is 2,000 pixels wide, but my board is actually 4,800 pixels high, it's going to adjust the image size to match that. It doesn't want the image to be any bigger than it kind of can be natively to print sharply. So let me rotate this guy around. When you move your mouse over the object, let me zoom in a little here by just hitting Control plus. You can see that there's a rotator cursor. If I move my mouse over these boxes, I can just click and drag on those and it will change the size of the image. if I click and drag when it has the rotate me cursor, it will rotate either freehand. If you hold down shift, it kind of snaps to different angles. So of course, let's keep that as right an angle as possible. Now the first thing we're going to want to do is figure out how large this drawing is. And there really isn't a dimension until you go and print something. That's one of the tricky parts about the electronic world. However, we can size it based on the sheet of paper. And what we can do, first of all, if you go to the window menu, or the view menu, we can turn on a number of things which are going to help us. So the one that's the most handy is the rulers. And if I check that, you'll see there's a ruler that shows up on the top and the bottom that is related to the size of the sheet. And you can actually use these rulers. If I click and drag on this left ruler, I can drag it into the document, and that gives me like a little bit of a guide. Okay, and in fact, if that's 14 inches, I can figure out how big this plan needs to be physically. As we know, we drew this at 1/4 of an inch equals a foot. Now the photograph, who knows how far I was standing from that drawing? So the photograph doesn't know how large it is. And this is kind of one of the main points of Photoshop. It doesn't understand what's in the drawings. All it understands is pixels. So you have to be careful, but it also means you have some opportunities to manipulate your drawings. Just because it doesn't care. It doesn't care if this is a wall or a line. It just sees a bunch of pixels. So anyway, what that means, I can drag in a reference line that is 36 feet in scale. Now 36 feet in scale is 9 inches away. So I'll just drag it over here to 23 inches. And that is how wide I need to make this plan. And all I have to do is just stretch it up. And obviously, I'm running out of space here, so Control Z to zoom in and out. You can also, by the way, hold down the Alt button, and that also, while you're scrolling, that will get you to the right scale, or at least the right visibility. You can nudge things using the arrow keys. So if I align one side of this 36-foot dimension with my reference line, I can drag it out. Now, of course, it does stretch it proportionally. I wish there was an easier way to do this, but you'll kind of get used to going back and forth, nudging this thing. But you can see that's pretty close. Now, I was only so accurate drawing this by hand, so of course you have to take it all with a grain of salt. The other thing is, if I drag in a reference line from the top, I can drag it up against my floor plan, and you see how I'm ever so slightly off. Well, I can come in here and maybe I'll zoom in a little, and I can try to rotate my document ever so slightly. Now, if you move your mouse farther away from the object, it does make it a little bit easy. See how I'm just really half a degree off. Again, any of these changes, you need to click the checkbox here to commit to the transformation. And once you've got it perfectly aligned, you're going to want to save your document. Always save the document. And the reason for this is you're going to forget, and you don't want to get too far before you forget to save your document. I'll just do Control S to save and put it into some folder that has to do with your class. That's a good idea. And I might even call this, Final Boards 1. Okay, I think I'm going to end up with 2 boards. I just have too many images. And click Save. Now, one thing you'll notice is that is a file format called a PSD, a Photoshop document. So you won't be able to open that on other pieces of, you won't be able to preview it or send it to anybody. To save it in a file format, for example, that you can print, you're usually going to want to export into some other file format. PNG is pretty common. You can also save as, and saving as, if you want to send it to somebody, but you want to make sure it's the highest quality, you can do something like a PDF file, which is what our scans were in the first place, and that's a good idea for sharing your document. Now, by the way, if you have used something like Dropbox, which is what I used, it converted the scanned images the phone scanned images into pictures already. And so if you're using a PC and these are all in one folder somewhere, you can kind of modify them right now using your Windows photo viewer. I'm just using the rotate tool. You could even crop it down if you wanted to. Here's my site plan. And we have a number of different drawings. Some of them I apparently did not label. And then some of them you're going to need to just rotate them so that they're consistent. You can do this in Photoshop, but it does save yourself a little bit of time as you go through and do these one by one. So each of these, rotate them first, however you're going to do it, and then import them into your sheet of drawings. I'm going to have two sheets in my project and in our projects because there just isn't enough space in one drawing. On one sheet, let's have the plan and reflected ceiling plan, and we'll have the two interior elevations and two sections. We'll also have this title block. Now on the other sheet, we're going to have all the exterior elevations, the two perspective views, and the site plan. And these are all listed in the shopping list on our assignment on Canvas. Now you may be wondering, do I have to go through this process every time to scale every single drawing? Well, there are a couple of tricks. I mean, by all means, you could take your reference line. I've put my floor plan here in the upper left corner of the sheet. I could move this over and, stretch each drawing. But there is another trick, and this actually allows me to discuss the next major element of Photoshop, which is that it is organized by what are called layers. I'm going to click on this layers button over here. And if you're not seeing that, by the way, you might not be in the right workspace. The workspace that normally comes with Photoshop is called the Essentials. If it's not looking right, you might want to reset that. Anyway, so here's my layers button. I can click on that and it'll show you what layers are in your document. And I say, how did I get any layers in here in the first place? I'm just going to stretch this out so we can see it a little better. Well, first of all, there is a background layer. And if you just open up a photo, that photo will be on the background layer. But in this case, we started a blank document. So there's a blank white sheet background layer. And then if you click on one of these layers, you see how it changes what's selected. So you can pretty quickly figure out which ones are which. Now, here's my reflected ceiling plan. So I can click on that layer in order to edit it. And then you can just click and drag on it. By the way, up here in the options toolbar here right at the top, it kind of tells you what's going on. If you allow it to auto select, then when you click on something, it'll try to select that. But sometimes when you say want to manipulate a layer, you don't want it to do that. You want to make changes only to the layer that you've selected. So be careful of that. Each of these layers is basically an opaque sheet of paper, but it doesn't have to be opaque. And there's a couple of things. First of all, I could just make the opacity less than 100% of that layer. So you see how I've got it selected here. And I can drag the opacity down and, ooh, it becomes semi-transparent. How nice. So you can do that. You can also turn it on and off by just poking the little eyeball. So sometimes you'll bring something into a drawing, but then not need it. So you can just turn it off without, maybe you'll need it later, maybe not. Anyway, the thing that we want to do is change what's called the blending mode. Now, normally the default value is everything is opaque, but there are, under here where it says normal, there are other options for the way you can blend these things. And in fact, you'll get a little preview depending on which one you select. Now, in our case, we are just dealing with black and white drawings. We're not dealing with photographs. And a lot of these are very photographic in nature. If we just choose the multiply blending mode instead of the regular one, again, I'm on this layer, you see how the drawing becomes kind of transparent. And what's happening is anything that's white is in fact ignored, and anything that's black is considered opaque. And now it becomes a lot easier. I can just drag this puppy over my plan and then use my little editing grips here to resize it. And now you'll find out just how accurately I traced this drawing. I'm going to overshoot a little bit, and obviously it would help to be as accurate as possible, but we'll try our best is basically what I'm hoping for here. And you can also, again, use the arrow keys to nudge it left or right. It's still a tad large, but I think we're almost there. There we go. So I'll just commit to that transformation. And now I can move that document down. And normally when you click and drag an object to move it, it goes any which way. But if you hold down Shift, you'll see these purple lines come out that indicate that they are going to be aligned with one another. And that's what you want. You want your drawings to be in agreement with one another. You want them to align. And you see how they remained connected even though they're totally different objects. So you can repeat this with any of your drawings. I've got my section drawing here, and I've also got one of my interior elevations. Again, use your tool, your auto select button selectively so that you can click and drag on different objects, change their blending mode, and then of course resize them so that they match the floor plan. Again, once you've got the floor plan to scale, use it to scale all of your other drawings. Now I've got my site plan here and I sized it using my floor plan. Again, this is why we drew the outline of the roof on our floor plan is for this reason. It helps us to align the two. But I don't want it on this sheet. I want it on another sheet with just blank exterior drawings. So I'm going to copy it to the clipboard by holding down Control and tapping C. And then I'll just hit the delete button to delete it from this sheet. But then I'm going to go and start a new drawing. Control N is the way that you do that. And if you go to the print menu, we could go through this whole kit and caboodle again, but what you'll see is that actually that same sheet is available here in my recent items. So save yourself a minute so you don't have to reconfigure everything. I'll click Create. Now I have a new blank sheet, and Control V is how you paste it in. And it will paste it right into the middle of your sheet. And now I can bring in my exterior elevations and size those using this same technique that I used previously. Now you can see that I have placed all of my drawings in more or less the same order that I created them, except that I have rotated them so that the ground line is always down. And this is just kind of graphical standard. It's a lot easier to read your drawings on the sheet when they look like this. And I've used reference lines to help align them. Now, you don't have to keep it in this kind of fold open box style. I can easily select other layers here, these two exterior elevations. Maybe I'll drag them down to the bottom and align them with this one. Again, the main thing is when you do that, use a reference line so that the ground planes always align. So many parts of your different project that you want to make sure they line up so that they can kind of work together. Also, perspective drawings can be much larger. They are not to scale, so you can stretch these guys out and make them as big as you want. So I could drag this over here. Maybe I'll let that horizon line go in the middle. However, if you want to get rid of it, one of the tricks is while the object is selected, the layer here for my perspective, I can actually just use one of the selection tools. And these are over here. It's called a marquee tool. And there are a couple of different ones. There's elliptical ones and single rows and all sorts of other stuff. But the rectangular one is the easiest one. And I would want to make sure that the correct layer is selected. But when I hit the delete button, it will clear away anything that I have selected. And this is a great way if you just want to hide part of an individual drawing. Remember, it will only work on the current layer, so you're not going to run the risk of accidentally erasing stuff like you might do in the real world. By the way, this selection box here that's visible, I can make that go away by just holding down the control button and tapping D, and it disappears. So again, the delete button and control D. We don't need to see the vanishing points, and we can even delete the other side here if we were so inclined. I'll just do that. There we go, control D. So while you're here in your sheet of drawings, you can actually add in a few other things some people like to have, not always required, certainly not at this stage, but a border is sometimes really nice, or even just a bar of color at the bottom of your sheet to kind of give it a little bit of visual weight. Right now I don't even have a title on here. And Photoshop does have some very simple drawing tools. There's a rectangle tool, which basically just draws a rectangle, as you can see from the little video that plays when I leave my mouse over it. Now, the trick is going to be, you'll want this rectangle to show up at the bottom of all your other drawings, so it doesn't get in the way. Let me show you what I mean. I'm going to draw a rectangle. Just click on the rectangle tool, and then click and drag a box here at the bottom of my drawing. And what you'll see is that anything I draw over, it'll cover up. Also, you can change the size of the rectangle by just using your move tool, which, by the way, you can just tap the letter V, and you can change it. It has the same grips that we have seen earlier. I can grab the end grips to shorten it, the top grips, but look at this, it's really annoying. It's right on top of my other drawing. Well, that's because it's at the top of the list here on my layer list. If I just drag it down below the others, now you can see that my object here, my tiny house graphic scale will show up. And I can also make that bigger, delete the name tiny house, and I could type in the letter tiny house too. The text tool here in Photoshop really works very similar to any other text tool. You click the T to get the text tool to pop up, and click and drag a window around which you want the text to go, or in which you want the text to go. And then you just start typing, and I can call it my tiny house. Now that's really tiny for a tiny house. If you just do Control-Alt to select all, or you can use your mouse to change it. You can change the size of the text. Let's see, that looks pretty good. I could even make it a hair bigger if I wanted. And you can do things like center it. So it's just like your typical text editor. Obviously there are fonts available. You could probably even change the color. Now, the other thing that you can do is the rectangle that I drew, I can change what's called the fill pattern of that object. I just need to go to the Properties menu up here. It looks like, I don't know what that looks like, a bunch of boxes or something. Anyway, if you come up to that menu, and you can change this before you draw it, you can click on the color, and it'll give you a number of different options for picking the color, and there are all sorts of different ways of choosing colors, either by name, or you could even pick it from a nice chart. Either way. You can also, and that's called the fill pattern, by the way. The stroke pattern is how thick that line is. So I could make that line really thick, or I could make it really thin, or I can make it go away altogether by just dragging this slider around. And there are even a few options for making it things like a dashed or dotted line, if you like that kind of thing. And if you go with no fill and a dotted line, that makes a nice border around your whole project. And you can see the bottom border looks pretty good. I fiddled around with the size of my text. I even put my name on there because I want to get a good grade. But I left my graphic scale as hand-drawn, and that's probably fine. Now, I did a terrible job of writing my titles, so if you did a terrible job writing your titles, you can also use text. Now, I'd love you all to learn architectural lettering, but I know that the reality is that lettering is pretty hard. So you can put it in using pieces of text, and probably nothing bigger than about 24-point text is good, especially if you print. And if you have a piece of text already in and you've selected it, using the Move tool, I can hold down the Alt button and it will make a copy of that piece of text. And if I hold down Shift, it will even keep the text aligned. And you can see this is a pretty nice way to get some very nice titles, all about the same distance from the drawing. And then I can just come in, click on the text tool, and I should be able to come right in here and name every single one of these. So it's up to you as to which you think is neater. If you do write it in, then be sure to select your site plan and delete the name, the offending text, if your text is really horrible. I think I'd prefer if you left in your hand lettering, just so I can see how it went. However, I understand that some of you were struggling mightily with that, and then it's fine to use the computer. One other thing you can do to gussy up your project is fix your scanned images that maybe didn't come in all that great. Now this is just a photograph, and you can really see how it doesn't have the nice density and darkness of the lines, and of course it also hasn't gotten rid of all the white area. So to do that, make sure you're on that layer, and then by clicking on it here in the layers list, then down in the middle of the layer dialog box, there's an option here. It looks like a kind of a half moon here, circle. If you click on that, there's a number of different what are called adjustment layers. And these do a lot of really great things. For example, if I choose the black and white adjustment layer, it will turn that drawing. It's only slightly different, but it turns it into a black and white drawing. And this actually affects every layer below it in the stack. So do be careful. You might have other drawings underneath there that you don't want black and white. Anyway, the one that can really help us when we have all this kind of haze in the background is this levels or the curves one. In fact, let's go with the curves one. Looking at this one, I think that'll be the most helpful. I'll call up the curves adjustment layer, and it looks just like a graph. And there's a number of things that you can set here, including the black point, the gray point, and the white point of the drawing. And if you click on the one here that says white, it's a little eyedropper, and I want the gray to be the white. If I just click on that, it should make most of it go away. Okay, sometimes that doesn't work so great, and you might have to zoom in and set the black point, and obviously if I had some gray in this drawing, I would want to adjust that too. But that's a pretty quick way. You can also just drag this curve. What you'll see is as you drag it, the entire drawing starts to change as to what it shows. I'll just drag the top over here, and this is sort of where the black is in the drawing. So sometimes you can drag it over just a hair. See how it's not quite at the top, but that little tiny bit of stuff down here, that's often smudges. So I've actually gotten this a little cleaner than this scanned image, and now it looks pretty nice. And once you've completed that, you want to make sure it just applies to this layer. I like to just select these, and it's kind of destructive because it gets rid of that original photo, but I like to select all these layers. You can just hold down Shift to click on individual multiple layers at the same time, or Control to select them when they aren't stacked on top of each other. Anyway, and then you can just right click on them, and there's an option to merge layers. And what that will do is it just creates one layer that is this changed, modified photograph. So once you've got all of your images on both of your sheets, you are going to want to make sure that your title blocks match when you have more than one sheet. And I'm just going to select mine here, the text and the graphic scale and the whole kit and caboodle. Control C to copy. I know you can't see it, but maybe you can hear it. I'll go to another sheet. Now I could just paste in. However, Photoshop has a special way to paste called Paste Special. It's under the Edit menu, and you can paste in place. And what it will try to do is find the exact same position in this document as you had in the other document. And this allows you to kind of keep things aligned perfectly. And there you have it. You can set up a couple of boards pretty quickly using these different techniques and adjust your photos of your images, of your drawings, to look as best as possible.